Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Let me start with my profound apologies. We had technical difficulties on this end. So sorry. I'm not a technological wizard, so we had to figure that out. Now we're here. Gosh, a little late. I hope you're still with us. I see that we do still have a pretty lively chat here going on. So, man, it's great to have you with us. And again, our sincere apologies. We were ready to roll at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, and we had some technical issues here, connectivity issues, I guess you would say. But we are here now. So I expect and I hope and pray that we still have a big turnout here, as we always do for our live streams. We usually have several thousand people from around the world joining us. Let's see, is anyone joining us now? We are here. We are here. Thank you for joining us here today on the Watchman Newscast live stream. And it looks like we do have people with us. Okay, spread the word. The Watchman was a little bit late, but he is there now. Some technical difficulties we apologize for. Technology can be great, but sometimes it can be a headache, right? And it looks like we've got it figured out now, which is good because we've got some things to talk about today. Now, it is Holy Week for Christians around the world. Easter is this Sunday. Happy Easter to everyone. He is risen. To my Jewish friends who are going to be observing Passover, I hope you have a great holiday as well. And although it is a significant time for Jews and Christians around the world, we've seen an uptick in terror in Israel. The terror wave we've been talking about here on the newscast, it's very much still going on. There have been no successful attacks today, but Israeli police are conducting raids and rounding up suspected terrorists and engaging in firefights with them as well. Jenin has become a hotspot in the West Bank, or what we call here in the Watchman Newscast, Judea and Samaria. That's the biblical heartland, and that's what the Bible calls that region. Jenin was a big, big problem during the Second Intifada between 2000 and 2006. It is now a major problem again. And Israeli security services and the Israel Defense Forces have been engaging in some firefights there and bringing these people in. Look, 14 Israelis killed in the past 2.5 weeks alone in a series of terror attacks. Some carried out by ISIS-inspired terrorists who were actually Israeli Arabs and Israeli citizens who did not live in the Palestinian areas. But the other two deadly attacks carried out by Palestinians who came through a gap in Israel's security barrier and were able to enter Israel and carry out these demonic, deadly attacks. And remember, by the way, the security barrier in Israel is only 97% fence and about 3% wall, contrary to that popular anti-Israel propaganda calling it an apartheid wall. You'd envision the Berlin Wall or something horrific like that, stretching for miles and miles and miles, people walled. No, that's not the case. Number one, it is 97% fence. And number two, and we focused on this on the newscast a few days ago, where I interviewed the architect of Israel's security fence. His name is Danny Terza, Colonel Danny Terza. And back in 2005, 2006, the fence was completed. And folks, it wasn't a coincidence that once that security fence was completed, the suicide bombings, which had ravaged Israel for 5-6 years at that point during the Second Intifada, plummeted. Thanks in large part, thanks obviously, mainly to the erection of that security fence. So the terror wave right now is troubling in that sense, in that, yes, two did sneak through the gap, but the other two attacks were carried out by people who live in Israel, who aren't on the other side of the security barrier, but Israeli Arabs living in Israel who were inspired by ISIS. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett alluded to this when this terror wave started. He said, look, what we saw last May, in May 2021, during that war between Israel and Hamas may have been kind of a foreshadowing, because what we had, if you remember our reporting here in the newscast and what went down there in the so-called mixed cities, cities like Lod in Israel, where Israelis, Jews, and Arabs live side by side, there was violence with Arabs attacking the Jews in those cities. So Israel had to be concerned about what was going on in Gaza with Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Iranian proxies there firing rockets at Israel. Then on the other hand, Israel had to be concerned about what was going on within in Israeli cities. So the current terror wave has been very, very troubling in that regard. We've got a lot to talk about. We've still got people, even though we were late today, we've still got people from across the United States and across the world, which is always exciting. Africa, Europe, Asia, Latin America, we are all together as watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this 2022. Continue to send in your comments and also your questions. And we will have, we'll be going a bit shorter today. We'll go to 5 p.m. Eastern time, but that's good because that means we will get to questions and answers sooner today. We have a kind of a shortened newscast because we had to start late, and I got to knock off at 5 p.m. Eastern, but that's okay. We've got 32 solid minutes of content left. So send those questions along. Greetings to everyone. We are praying for everyone in Israel right now who's been affected by these attacks. We're praying for the peace of Jerusalem as we are mandated by the Bible to do, and for the people of Israel and the land of Israel right now during this very difficult time. Hey, the world shrugs its shoulders, right? They say, oh, another terror attack in Israel. The Jews probably had it coming. Sadly, that's what many around the world say, but we are trying to transmit the truth here on the Watchman Newscast, and it can't get any truer than the fact that Israel is a lone beacon of democracy, freedom, and sanity in a sea of tyranny in the world's most volatile and chaotic region, the Middle East. We're going to keep digging into this, but real quick, a question to sort of begin with. We're already into it now, but we're about 7 weeks in to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In your view, how is this going and where is it going? On one hand, the big headlines in recent days, obviously, were the atrocities committed against civilians by Vladimir Putin's forces. On the other hand, this thing seems to be settling in. I don't want to say into a stalemate, but it seems to be, okay, this thing's going to last for a while. Now, Russian forces withdrew from the areas around the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago almost, and now they are regrouping. And they are entering en masse the eastern half of Ukraine, and they have their eyes on the Donbass region. Where is this heading? Will Russian forces attempt to regroup and make a move towards Kyiv once again? Vladimir Putin just named a new general to oversee the campaign in Ukraine. He's the same man who oversaw Russia's campaign in Syria, which was a bloody affair in which Russia used chemical weapons and showed really no hesitation in killing civilians. They haven't shown much of that either in Ukraine. So now they have an even stronger hand at the helm running their campaign in Ukraine. We will see what happens. We have continued reports of Russia also attempting to recruit Middle East volunteers to travel to Ukraine and fight alongside Russian forces. We reported here in the newscast a few weeks ago that Vladimir Putin personally put out a call for volunteers from the Middle East to join with Russia, in particular from Syria. Some 16,000 volunteers, according to top Russian officials, signed up to join Vladimir Putin's war machine in Ukraine. Now, are they making their way to Ukraine yet? We don't know. Was that 16,000 number inflated? Possibly, and perhaps even probably. But I do think that there are absolutely volunteers in places like Syria and Libya, where Russia has had a footprint and has some serious allies that are certainly willing to send mercenaries to fight alongside Russian forces. And as the title of today's live stream says, essentially turn Ukraine into a bit of a proxy war. Now, when we talk about Russian allies in the Middle East, and we talk about forces that are very adept at fighting proxy wars, who do you think of? I know that I think of the Iranian regime. No one is more skilled in a diabolical, evil way in using proxies than the Iranian regime, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and so on. Iran largely wages its war against Israel and the United States, the little Satan and the great Satan, in their ideological view, through proxy. The Iranian regime rarely gets its hands dirty but it will act through proxy. Exhibit A, the Hamas war against Israel last May in 2021. By the way, with this uptick in violence that we're seeing, it's during Ramadan. I mentioned at the top, Easter and Passover. Well, it is also Ramadan, and Muslims are observing that month. And it seems that every Ramadan, there is an increase in attacks. And Hamas uses this occasion to increase its attacks. Hamas is now making threats against Israel and against Jerusalem, in particular, the Temple Mount, which it says that the Jews are defiling. It said the same thing in May 2021. And really, the situation on the Temple Mount helped provoke that war last year, courtesy of Hamas. Jews were doing nothing wrong on the Temple Mount, but Hamas used it as a pretext. And Mahmoud Abbas, by the way, used it as the president of the Palestinian Authority, used it as a pretext to launch hostilities against Israel. And with that anniversary, that one-year anniversary coming up of that war last year, it will be very interesting to see what Hamas and its fellow Iranian proxy in Gaza, Islamic Jihad, do. Back to the proxy factor in Ukraine. I want to quote directly for you from an article in the Times of Israel. And folks, listen to this and talk about things really broadening in the worst possible sense in Ukraine. And it gives you an idea, too, of the heavy losses Russia has taken there. Look, finally this week, a top Kremlin spokesman, and I quote, said Russia has suffered significant, quote, significant military losses in Ukraine. The exact number of men and equipment, tanks lost, we don't know. But finally, Russia lifted the veil this week and acknowledged, you know what? Yeah, this has not gone the way we expected. And that's why Vladimir Putin is, number one, changing who's at the helm, who's running this campaign in Ukraine. Number two, he's sacking, perhaps even purging some of his top military and intelligence officials. And thirdly, with young Russian soldiers going to their deaths in Ukraine, he's looking elsewhere for, in his view, cannon fodder, I guess you would say. He's not someone who has much of a regard for human life, clearly. So he'll recruit people from the Middle East and he'll say, hey, you owe us one. Russia came into Syria in 2015, September of 2015. They're still there, by the way, and they are there to stay in their view. And they helped bail out the regime of Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator. So he's saying, you owe us one, which brings us to Iran and its cozy relationship with Russia. And when we heard about Russia recruiting volunteers from the Middle East to Ukraine a few weeks ago, the first thing I thought, and I expressed this on the newscast, was, okay, this seems like a prime opportunity for Iran and Hezbollah to get involved in Ukraine, to send some of their foot soldiers, advisors, weaponry, etc., to Ukraine to help their good friend Vladimir Putin. Remember, folks, in 2015, the summer of 2015, Qasem Soleimani, the not so dearly departed terror master, twice visited Moscow, met with Vladimir Putin face to face, and implored the Russian leader to enter Syria and help save the regime of Bashar al-Assad, help Iran and Hezbollah bail out their buddy. That's exactly what Putin did. And now Putin could be saying to Iran, now you have to help us in Ukraine. There's a possibility, no doubt, that he internationalizes this conflict. We saw him take units from Chechnya and bring them to Ukraine as well. So there is a distinct possibility that Iran, and I'm not talking about heavy manpower and a heavy footprint by Iran, but would anyone be surprised if at least some special forces types or advisors, quote unquote, from Iran, Hezbollah, who are adept at urban warfare and guerrilla warfare, which is the kind that Russia will see in Ukrainian cities and is already seeing, no doubt. Would it be a surprise if the likes of Iran and Hezbollah and these Syrian mercenaries, who also have plenty of urban warfare experience, paid a visit to Ukraine to help their Russian allies? Not at all. From the Times of Israel, let's read it and send those questions along. We'll be getting the questions sooner rather than later today. And again, if you're just joining us, apologies for the abridged, there's a word for you, version of the Watchman Newscast Livestream today. Had some technical difficulties. We are here with you now until 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you missed anything so far, check it out here in our archives right here on the newscast. And a few people were asking in the comments, by the way, over the past few days, how to become Watchmen premium members. Just go on our homepage. I think there's a tab that says join and a tab that says membership. Daniel, our trusty producer, am I right, Daniel, if you're listening? Yes, Daniel says to hit join on our homepage, and some really cool perks of becoming a monthly member. $4.99 a month. You will get exclusive first views of brand new episodes of The Watchmen, including commentary from yours truly, and we've got a lot more cool stuff planned. So if you want to check out premium membership, please do that as well. But let's read from the Times of Israel. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq are smuggling weapons to arm Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. Now, this is according to a report in The Guardian. I am not a fan of The Guardian. It's a left-wing publication. I'm being nice to say that. Based in the UK, which is very anti-Israel. But when it comes to Middle East reporting, Russia, Ukraine, etc., okay, there could be some validity here. And I'm just quoting from The Guardian. It doesn't seem beyond the realm of possibility. RPGs, anti-tank missiles, and Brazilian-designed rocket launcher systems have made their way from Iraq to Ukraine, according to the report, which cited members of the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, as well as regional intelligence services familiar with the matter. Let's see what else we have here. An Iranian-made 373 missile system was also donated to Moscow by Iranian authorities, a source told The Guardian. RPGs and anti-tank missiles, I'm just reading on here, folks. They were transported from Iraq to Iran, where they were collected by Russian authorities, who then shipped them to Russia by sea. Unbelievable. Actually, totally believable. And this is, wow. This is apparently happening under the noses of the Iraqi central government, I guess. Incredible. And Russia has also, according to U.S. officials, been leaning on China, as we know, for military aid. Hey, but let's unpack the fact that Iranian-backed Iraqi militias are helping to arm Russia. What does everyone make of that? I don't think anyone's surprised by that, knowing the long history, number one, of Iran operating through Proxy and the viciousness of those Iranian proxies in the region. But secondly, again, folks, they owe Russia one. That's a simplistic way of putting it, but it's true. Russia has come to the aid of Iran and Hezbollah and their allies in Syria. And now Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah and those allies, they owe Russia one. And this is Russia's moment of need. Things are not going well in Ukraine. And there you have it. It's going to be interesting to see what U.S. officials say about this, about weapons flowing from Iraq through Iran into the hands of Russia, just as these nuclear talks they're stalled now. There's a pause on those nuclear talks between the U.S., Russia, China, Britain, France, Germany, and the Iranian regime, looking to revive that disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Will Biden administration negotiators bring this up if those meetings start back up again in Vienna? That's a very interesting question. I think not, because the Biden administration is hell-bent, and we talked about this on yesterday's newscast. You can check it out here in our archives if you missed it. The Biden administration is, I'd use the word obsessed with resuscitating that disaster of a deal, and they're not going to press too hard. And they're trying to wiggle around, as we discussed on yesterday's newscast. They're saying, okay, we don't want to lift the terrorist designation against Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, because that's what Iran is demanding to make the nuclear deal a reality. Iran says, hey, we're at the finish line. All we need to do now is for you, great Satan, America, to remove Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps from the U.S. terror blacklist. Now, it was interesting. Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, last seen in Afghanistan, helping to preside over that debacle last summer. Milley said, well, I believe the Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force should remain on the terror list. He testified last week before Congress on Capitol Hill. Very interesting, folks. Did you notice? He didn't say the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. He said their Quds Force, which is an arm of the IRGC. Is that going to be the tack that the Biden administration takes? Okay, we're going to leave the Quds Force on the list, but we'll take the IRGC writ large off the list. Folks, I can assure you, the Biden White House has come this far. They want to make this deal happen. They want to just give the mullahs in Tehran money, billions of dollars in sanctions relief, and say, hey, here's the money. Here's everything you want. Take it, and please just leave us alone. That's what they're trying to do. This is the definition of appeasement. What's the definition of insanity? Doing something over and over and expecting a different result. We did this already in 2015. It's even worse this time around. And last word here, by the way, this nuclear deal would only last for about 2.5 years. It kicks the can down the road for a few years. Then Iran breaks out and does whatever it wants. So we could go on and on. I've posed the question here, and I'll pose it again. Can you name me one thing that the United States is getting out of this Iran nuclear deal? Just one. I'm all ears. Please, someone share, unless I'm missing something. What I see is Iran being gift wrapped billions of dollars in sanctions relief, Iran having perhaps even the IRGC removed from the terror blacklist, Iran not being required to give up its ballistic missile program, Iran not being required to end its sponsorship of terror. I'm grasping for straws here, folks, trying to figure out what the United States gets other than a black eye and a war. Because this Iran nuclear deal will make war more and not less likely in the region. And I can assure you that Israeli officials right now are watching very closely from Jerusalem. And they're watching how this is all playing out. And they're saying we are going to have to defend ourselves by ourselves without anyone's help, if needed, to stop this existential threat to the world's one and only Jewish state. We're going to get into questions in a minute. Might be one more topic I want to hit on real quick in this short but sweet version of the newscast live stream today. Let's see what else we have. There was, I believe, one more thing as I'm just glancing here at my phone. Pardon me, folks, for looking down here. Something to mention. I just took a few bullet points here before we came on air here. Khamenei, the Iranian supreme leader, to give you an idea where the Iranian regime's heads are at, he tweeted out yesterday, Khamenei, the nuclear negotiations and the nuclear deal, it's going great. It's all going very well. That tells you all you need to know from a Western perspective, an American perspective, an Israeli perspective, a Sunni Arab perspective. If you're sitting in the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco right now, you hear those words from Khamenei and you're not feeling very good about these negotiations. If he's crowing about how well it's going, that means it's not going well for us. And he is winning that negotiation, as I just laid out for you. So the IRGC factor is the big one. We've got not only Republican lawmakers, but also Democrat lawmakers, allies of Joe Biden, ostensibly, which shocked me, coming forward and saying, hey, don't remove the IRGC from the terror list. That is too crazy for us, they're saying. So very interesting. None of the radical left Dems like the AOCs of the world signing on, but some were indeed saying to Joe Biden, don't remove the IRGC from the terror blacklist. It sends the wrong message. Finally, some common sense in a world where common sense is anything but common today. We also had some former U.S. officials writing a letter to Biden this week and saying, don't do it. So we're keeping a very close eye on that. Last thing to mention, Joseph's tomb. If you watched the newscast on Monday, this past Monday, you saw what happened to Joseph's tomb. It was vandalized last weekend by Palestinian rioters. It is now being guarded by the Israel Defense Forces. Just a quick update there. Pretty nasty stuff at a spot where, look, hey, Nablus is where it's located, on the outskirts of Nablus today in Samaria, the biblical heartland. That was called Shechem in the Bible. And the book of Genesis talks about Joseph being buried there. And this is, many believe, the very site where Joseph is buried. People aren't going there to worship it. It's a site. We know that, but it has great historical and biblical significance. And it does not it should not be defiled and vandalized and lit on fire by Palestinian rioters. And that's exactly what happened. So we're keeping an eye on that. It appears that there is a greater amount of security there now. Thankfully, this is not the first time, as we've discussed here in the newscast, that Palestinians have targeted Jewish and Christian holy sites over the years. And again, it happens during Easter week. And as the Jewish people are on the eve of Passover here. So never a dull moment in the world's most volatile region. The Middle East never sleeps. And that's why you're here. You're here in the Watchman Newscast for such a time as this, to get those insights that you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get to the questions. Daniel, can I find them in, where can I find them? In Teams, I suppose? Okay, folks, give me 1 second as I pull up your questions. Thank you for your patience. You've had a lot of patience with us today, folks. Let's see what we got here. In the meantime, as I am looking for these, let's see what we have in the chat. Let's see. Good question by Susan Spalding. Susan, thank you for your question. Will the violence in Israel cease once Ramadan is over? That is a good question. Is this just a temporary thing? Or is this going to be long lasting? We have someone says here a good point. Lipatz Dotan, who I believe is from Israel, I'm sure. He says, Susan, it really depends. And I have to say, you're right there, my friend. Could this be something that sustains? Could Hamas ignite something over this Ramadan period and it outlasts Ramadan? It continues on for weeks. That's a possibility. Or could they kind of call off the wolves once Ramadan ends? I mean, honestly, there's always the specter of violence from Gaza, no matter what season, what time of the year it is. So something could ignite during Ramadan that has long-lasting ramifications, God forbid, but that could certainly happen. But this time every year, like clockwork, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and their ilk say this is a time for martyrdom. That's how we see the Ramadan period, and we're going to increase our efforts, diabolical, evil efforts against Israel. And you're seeing that again, once again this year. And folks, it's very interesting how they keep using Jerusalem as a pretext, and in particular, the Temple Mount. And that is the most coveted piece of real estate in the world. And the battle over the Temple Mount is only going to intensify. And the book of Zechariah says that a day is coming where Jerusalem will become like a burdensome stone, a cup of trembling for all nations, and that anyone who comes against it will be cut to pieces. So look for Jerusalem. If you look on the map, folks, it is the geographical center of the world. It's God's city. And literally, geographically, it is the center of the world. It's the center of the center. Israel on the map is the center of the world. Again, no coincidences, but Jerusalem is the center of that center. And it is increasingly going to become the focus of world events, not DC, Berlin, Tokyo, Beijing, Paris, London. Jerusalem more and more will capture and demand the world's attention in these prophetic times in which we are living right now. Let's see what else we have. Joseph is in heaven. He's just talking about the bones. I know. That's why I had to give you the caveat. When I talk about the significance of a holy site, we're not going there to worship the site itself or worship bones, but it is a place with great historical and biblical significance. Just to clarify that. It shouldn't be hard to understand that when I talk about the holy sites. And hey, it's a real thrill for me to, for instance, to be on the Temple Mount or at Joshua's altar, places where pivotal events in your Bible went down. It doesn't mean I'm worshiping the rocks. It means, wow, I'm here, and 2,000, 3,000 years ago, Joshua stood here. That's pretty cool and pretty exciting and has great significance, should have great significance for every believer. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Some questions. Some questions I see about natural gas, the Israel natural gas factor. We've talked about that in the newscast in recent weeks, and we will talk about it again soon. We're doing some research there. We want to do kind of a broader, deeper dive into the natural gas factor. Can Israel become an alternative for Europe to Russian natural gas? Remember, Russia provides some 40%, I believe, of Europe's natural gas. I'm sorry. And Europe now, belatedly, is waking up and saying, man, maybe it's not a good idea to rely on Vladimir Putin for our natural gas in the middle of January, because good old Vlad can cut it off whenever he wants to. If Europe continues to do what it's doing, say, in Ukraine, and protest the Russian invasion and provide at least some arms to Ukraine, Vladimir Putin could say, you know what, I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to cut off those natural gas supplies, and perhaps China and nations in Asia and nations in the Middle East will pick up the slack. Here's another question for you, and that's where Israel comes in. Potentially, Israel has nowhere near the amount of natural gas that Russia does, but could Israel provide at least some of that natural gas that Russia has been providing to Europe? A lot of that depends on the East Med pipeline that Israel has been talking about building, going from Israel through Cyprus, with a stopover in Egypt, apparently, as the natural gas is then sent through Cyprus into Europe. The Biden administration opposes this East Med pipeline. I know you're shocked by that, right? Wrong. After what happened with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, where Biden, the one pipeline he should have opposed, he didn't, and he dropped sanctions against Russia on that Nord Stream 2 pipeline carrying energy from Russia to Germany. Of course, most notoriously, we know he killed the Keystone pipeline. And now, magically, folks, somehow, oil and gas prices are absolutely through the roof here in the United States. I can tell you, I filled up the other day and I did a double take. Thank you, President Biden, because this all started long before the Russia-Ukraine war, which certainly intensified things, but this has been going on for quite a while, and we're in a very tough spot right now. Someone asks, let's see, do you think you can trust the media on what we are seeing in Ukraine? Now, we talked about this a few weeks ago on a live stream, actually. It depends. The mainstream media, to me, completely corrupt and not trustworthy. It depends on what you're talking about. Trust them on what? On casualty counts? Or what? Get more specific. Writ large, their reporting, their war reporting. Can you trust them on their war reporting? Say there was an offensive in this city. This is what happened, and this many people were killed. Or do you mean the narrative, the mainstream media narrative on this? I'm one who is very loath to agree with the mainstream media and the leftist media. So in that respect, you're given pause. But folks, I have to say, a lot of people, it seems, who've commented have said, you know, I support Vladimir Putin. People have actually said this because the media is against him. Hey, folks, two wrongs don't make a right. As bad as the mainstream media is, Vladimir Putin, make no mistake about it, is an evil man with evil intentions who is carrying out a horrific campaign in Ukraine. Some people say I don't want to go down this rabbit hole again. We did it a few weeks ago, and it was frustrating because some people don't seem to get it. I'll just leave it at this. Some people have said he's defending the West and Christianity. If he is doing that, then why is he aligned with the worst persecutors of Christians in the world, Iran and China? Answer that. And why are evangelicals, who aren't part of the official Russian Orthodox Church, which Putin subscribes to, why are evangelical Bible-believing Christians persecuted within Russia if he is a defender of the faith? We could go on and on about that, but I'll leave it at that. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see, guys, some questions. Wow. Someone makes an interesting point. Not a question, but what do you guys think of this? Someone said if Hamas and Hezbollah and these Iranian-backed Iraqi militias continue to arm Russia or assist Russia, will Israel arm Ukraine? And then it becomes a very interesting proxy situation, right? Israel has held off on arming Ukraine. to a major degree. Amir Sarfati and I discussed this on a recent newscast, and Israel's reasoning is complex. I mean, Russia right now is at Israel's doorstep in Syria, and Israel's trying to keep the peace as much as it can with Putin's regime so that Israel can continue to operate freely inside Syria to strike against Iran and Hezbollah and those various proxies who are, again, at Israel's doorstep and attempting to establish a beachhead along the Golan Heights on the Syrian side from which they can launch attacks against Israel. So Israel wants freedom of movement in Syria. And Israel believes if Russia puts its foot down in Syria and says no more airstrikes, Israel, then Israel would no longer be able to have the freedom of movement it needs, and that Iran and Hezbollah could establish that beachhead on Israel's border. That has been the main reason Israel has walked a fine line in this Russia-Ukraine conflict. And Naftali Bennett, the Israeli prime minister, has played a mediator role and flown to Moscow, met with Putin. He's on the horn to Zelensky. Israel has good relations with Russia and Ukraine, but we know that a great betrayal is coming. At least that's my view. And Amir and I talked about this recently. Amir Sarfati, our friend from Behold Israel, which you should also check out. There is a great betrayal coming where Russia eventually, prophetically, will turn against Israel down the line. I believe, if you look at the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, I believe that country to the uttermost north of Israel, which leads this latter days confederation against Israel, is indeed Russia. Will Vladimir Putin be at the helm of this invasion force? I do not know. Hey, folks, if this thing keeps spiraling downward for Putin in Ukraine, he could be deposed. There could be a coup. He could be overthrown. This is not a thing where, hey, it didn't go well, now we're going to vote him out. That's not how it works in Russia. So he could not be the leader much longer, or it could strengthen his hand and he could be the leader for a long time. Perhaps there's someone even worse than Putin who comes along after Putin who's involved in that Ezekiel invasion. We don't know. But to my mind, Russia will lead it. And look, I'm not the Lord. So I'm just, looking at how I read the scripture there. That's my take, and we all have different takes, and that's fine. But I believe that Iran and Turkey will be alongside Russia eventually. And it's interesting right now because Turkey is trying to kind of smooth things out with Israel, I guess you would say. All of a sudden, Erdogan, the Turkish tyrant, is having problems economically, and he's reaching out to Israel and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and trying to smooth out the relationship because he needs them right now. But a day is coming where I believe Turkey will align, and maybe it'll be a different Turkish leader. Who knows? This may be 20 years down the line, it may be 2 years down the line. But I believe time is short. So we're keeping an eye on this. Someone asked, can't you go longer than 5 p.m. Eastern? I'm so sorry, guys. I cannot, even though we started late today, because unfortunately I have another commitment right now that I need to film something for TBN. But God bless you guys. Thanks for your patience today. And thanks for bearing with us as we're a bit late. I promise the next live stream, we will be on time. We'll have these technical difficulties figured out. But thanks for hanging with us today. God bless all of you. Until tomorrow, remember, never hold your peace. See you tomorrow.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.